here. Jerry's out of town as well, but he did send over some odd deeds for us to kind of play around with. That's what we're going to try and do every time we get into this is look at some, and you guys are welcome to share some. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
So there's a few of them here he sent over. Just kind of kill time for a second while we wait for him to, or wait for a few more to pop on if we need to. It says a parcel of land in the southeast quarter of section 27, township 20 north, range 11 east, town of Springwater, Wishara County, Wisconsin, described as follows: commencing at the intersection of the south line of said quarter section and the high water line of Kusel Lake, then west along said south line 250.5 feet. That's north 28 degrees 28 minutes east, 302 feet to the point of beginning. Then south 75 degrees 45 minutes east to the high water line of Kusel Lake. Then southwesterly along the high water line 55 feet more or less to a point. Thence north 77 degrees 58 minutes west to a point, which is south 28 west 55 feet from the true point of beginning. Thence north 28 degrees 28 minutes east to the true point of beginning. So he notes some of the problematic call-outs there. Since the high water mark can and will change over time, when was that deed written, and what was the high water mark at that one? When the high water line changes, so does how the 55 feet is measured and where it ends. The next point has to be located by intersecting two courses. There's a bearing intersection, a bearing distance intersection. The first course, bearing only, depends on where the 55-foot distance along the lake ends. Without monument calls, it all gets a little squishy. The begin and end points of the last course are the same, he says. And this is a tough one. I am not one that says beginning at a point or commencing at a point, then to the true point of beginning, because sometimes when they get written like this, it's a little tough to see where you're actually starting from till you kind of get into that deed quite a bit more.
I think that's kind of a choice thing. It depends on where you're at. I always used beginning and true point of beginning. Here at the county, we use commencing and point of beginning, and just everyone's all over the place depending on what they want to use.
Yeah, I've noticed it's very regional. In the Midwest, I noticed a lot more of, on your introduction calls, your ties to the point of beginning. They wrote a lot more of distance bearing for those ties to a monument. And then once you got into the actual description itself, everything was called out bearing distance.
You'll just send me one of those.
Yeah.
So they're starting at a point, certain distance, blah, 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 and then doing a bearing as a reference. So they're expecting you to kind of do a resection calc if those points were known.
No, not really. It really reads like beginning at a point which is 55 feet north and 312 feet west from the northeast quarter of the section, and then running west 55 feet, south 55. So okay. There's no other calculation. They just write those two or whatever qualifying calls. They just write them backwards.
Okay. Because recently I saw a deed where the point of beginning was referenced to like 4 different points. So instead of going at a point of beginning and then 1 or 2 courses, or referencing that starting point, it had a starting point and then gave a reference to 4 different locations, which obviously 100 years later did not match among themselves. So that was fun trying to figure out what they really meant.
Yep.
Anyway, it made me think of that, wondering if that wasn't, you always get a surveyor that's practiced in one area and moved to a different area, and suddenly you're getting the legal descriptions that you're not used to seeing and not understanding the local precedents that he's used to.
Yep. And I've seen a lot. We do a lot with in our area, and everyone does. But we've got some canals that are technically owned by the U.S. government, but then administered locally by a water district. And as we've recreated those ones, they will just call a straight bearing and distance back to a section corner. So beginning at station, whatever the canal, set point being, bearing distance straight over, then they go to the end. And that end point also has a bearing and distance straight over to the same section corner. So you kind of have this rotational tie in there. But there is no basis of bearings to kind of set it other than locating the canal on the ground, which is an interesting one. A couple more that Jerry had in here. So this one says south 1801 west, 0.01 feet along said east line of section 1. So go ahead and measure 0.01 feet in any direction, let alone the one called for. I can hear Jerry in my head whining about this one.
I saw one like that recently, actually. But it kind of made sense because the previous deed dedicated a right of way at 49.99 feet for some reason. I don't know. And then now they were making it 60 feet, so they had to dedicate 20.01 feet to make it even 60. But different concept than what you're showing here.
Yep. An undivided 0.161508515 interest in and to the following described real estate, lots 10 and 11. The east 100 acres of the east 3/4 of the south half of section 2. 3/4 is not an aliquot part. And this is a Wisconsin one where Jerry practices. Lot 2 CSM 5857, CS 27 diagonal 307 and 308, R12866 diagonal, 52-5 diagonal, 26 diagonal, 89, described as section 13-7-6, part of the east half, the southwest quarter, and section 24-7-6, part of the northeast quarter. Northwest quarter, 5.751 acres. So that's a mouthful there. Definitely probably some Scribner errors and some misunderstanding of what, a dash or a diagonal actually meant when they actually typed that up, I'm guessing.
Is that supposed to be like a slash? CS.
That's what I'm thinking. It's like a slash. But I'm not quite sure. So CSM versus CS. I don't know what CS necessarily is trying to say, 27-/307, but lot 2 CSM is a Wisconsin certified survey map. It's kind of like a minor subdivision in that area. So it is a part of a map or a subdivision. So
yeah, I mean, here we have county survey books. So CS 27/307-308 would be a county surveyor book. But the diagonals definitely would have thrown me off quickly.
Yep. Okay, well, we've got a pretty good bunch here now. We're looking at 16 participants. And we'll see how the day goes here. It's about what we had last time. So let's jump into it. And like we do every time, I'd love to get anyone's feedback as we jump in and kind of go over it. My guess is we'll get most of the way through. We get all the way through chapter 2 and most of the way through, if not all the way through chapter 3 today, depending on the discussion. Last week's I didn't think would take up the whole time, and we ended up filling the whole hour and a half there with discussion just about the background on legal descriptions. So I'm excited to see where we get in here. But any thoughts, comments, things you agreed with or disagreed with, or we want to make sure we hit in chapter 2 as we jump into it? Okay. I assumed as much, experience tells me, but let's jump into it, start talking about it, see if we can't start a good discussion this week. Chapter 2 is all about supporting information. You've got this deed in front of you, and it doesn't make sense, like these deeds we just read. So how do we interpret it? What other information do we gather? And so Wattles talks a lot about the other resources we have and how we evaluate deeds. So he talks about the official records, adjacent deeds. He talks about the assessor's office. He talks about maps and the different types of maps that we can use: parcel maps, assessor's maps, survey maps, and then extrinsic sources. And so, just rolling through here, I think he's got some great examples of challenging deeds or calls, but I think the important thing that we kind of cover for a little bit, and we've talked about this in evidence and procedures, but what resources do you guys have? So that's the first question I'm going to kind of throw out here is state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. What resources? You've got this deed that doesn't quite line up, and you've got to go to other sources. Where do you go to get that stuff? How do you find that? Start plugging it in and seeing how you might interpret the deed in front of you.
Got a number of people from California here that can, yeah. So obviously, well, okay, in California, we, other than deeds, official records, you're gonna pull all the references that you can from that deed, if any of them exist, and then you're gonna start sifting through your county surveyor's office for any maps that cover that area to see if you can connect the dots and cover and play detective, recognize any of the lines that are maybe called for in the deeds. And that's probably your most reliable source of information. Anything that's recorded and or filed at the county surveyor's office is the information that once filed has not been altered. So you have a little bit of guarantee that it's been vetted for technical correctness by the county surveyor, and that it exists in its non-altered form since the beginning, since it's been filed. Anything beyond that, you get into what we tend to call locally here is quasi-public records. So sometimes you will get county surveyors, like surveyors' official maps. You could get Caltrans right-of-way maps. You could get, for example, LA County has probably 10 to 15 different types of maps through that they've been recording throughout their history. Well, recording is not a good word for it because they're not recorded. They're exist in the county surveyor's office, but they're living documents that can get altered over time. So those are not as reliable, and that's why we classify them as these quasi public records, which can still get you valuable information, but cannot, you want to avoid referencing them because the reliability isn't there. And eventually assessor's maps tend to be one of those that you rely upon even less, because in addition to them altering and changing numbers, they're also prepared by non-surveyors. So then you have that additional deficiency on top where it's easy to find information that has not been carried over correctly. But sometimes you do find yourself in a situation where that's the only information that's available. I'm sure David can add to this a lot.
No, you hit on all the high points right there. Definitely do not use the assessor's office maps because they're only for tax purposes, but they are a place to, if you can't figure out where you're at, it's a place to start. It's a place to help figure out your bearings. All these things that Connie mentioned, all these quasi-public references and maps are all good starting points. They're all additional help to help you figure out where you're at. To try to get to the recorded maps and record surveys and other signed and filed documents that the county surveyor's office or the recorder's office has. Yeah, definitely the title company is a great place. Yep. Yeah, Lori, yeah, you got a great reference with the title company, and that's the way to go. If they can often, yep, like you said, get you the information you need quickly. And that's a great thing to have.
Mm-hmm.
So I question then, Connie, Dave, for you guys, when you're looking at these what you call quasi-public records, do you ever reference those as kind of a background or secondary evidence in your survey narrative that says, look, I exhausted some of these. This is supporting that just kind of confirmed what I was seeing? Or is that just a reference to get you in the right direction, but then you rely more heavily on the more public vetted records?
So I've handled these in two different ways over time. One is obviously if you have the actual valid official record, you want to reference that one on the face of the map as the source of your information. However, sometimes this information doesn't exist, and then in the whole hierarchy of evidence, you go to the next step down. You reference it as best as you can. Sometimes these references also the way they're filed can be changed. So you usually want to be a lot more descriptive with how you reference it. If you need to just kind of do a simpler reference. The second way I handle those is if I still have an official record, but I have this additional evidence that make me question whether this particular record of survey or a map is fully correct. When I'm doing on a more complex boundaries, I will do a boundary retracement narrative. I will explain in my narrative that, okay, I'm looking at this map, I'm looking at this other reference. I have a reason to believe that. And then I explain basically what my thinking was, what my evaluation process is, so that whoever is either looking at my survey or retracing it afterwards understands that there might be a fork in the road. There might be additional evidence. A lot of times when you're doing a boundary, you're looking for the best possible evidence, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a good chunk of evidence that might pull you in a different direction. At some point, you have to decide which one to go with. But a lot of you might want to put in your narrative that you have considered this additional evidence, and it just that it didn't prevail. It's usually useful information for somebody either in a boundary dispute or somebody who's coming after you to understand the depth of your analysis. So I will not stick just to the top class of the official records references, but I will if additional information is useful. If the top class information or the official records are clear and heavily prevailing, then I will not introduce this additional evidence. But I've had projects where all you have is this quasi-public records. There's been some old surveys that I've done in Laguna Beach, California, which is this pretty affluent hilly area that was developed in 1920s. And because of the difficulty of terrain, probably in part, a lot of records between what's been filed and what's on the ground is very incongruent. And then on top of that, there were some surveyors that have historically operated in the area that have not filed any public records, but they kept their internal records in the office. So I have these maps that basically say private survey notes from this and this company that doesn't even exist anymore, but somebody else bought it and now they still have their records. But in the preparation of this map, I had access to those records and I was able to review them and confirm that the certain pipe has a little bit of a pedigree to it. So describe what you found, and some information is better than none.
In Laguna Beach, that's a unique situation that Connie is talking about. We have very few surveyors down in Orange County that I'm aware of that have their own private collections of maps. The majority I believe, are online for us, and we're blessed to have that. But yeah, Laguna Beach is an old area, subdivided a long time ago. You have a lot of different maps and a lot of different people doing things back then, and it's the oddball place, really, I think, for Orange County. I'd love to hear about New Jersey and how the maps are. Where are the maps and information in New Jersey at? That's what I want to hear.
Yeah, Joe, you want to jump on and walk us through a little bit there of how you figure that out?
Well, I'm kind of here to figure that out myself.
Fair
Uh,
enough.
a lot of the subdivision maps are filed at the county courthouse, but private surveys you have to figure out who did the survey and retrace it that way. I'm not licensed yet, so um a lot of this is all new to me. I've been a party chief for a long time, so I'm just here kind of learning. So a lot of it is scratch your head and figure it out as you go.
Wow,
So
that's
is that
tough.
oh, sorry, go ahead, David.
I was just saying that's tough. That's a tough road to haul there, man. Wow.
Yeah, we get by.
Yeah.
You got do it by mostly deeds, and it's a lot of head scratching and a lot of digging in the ground and neighbors yelling at you. So most of you know that.
Are you going towards surveyors because let's say you found someone's barn cap or something like that, so someone's been here, and that then you can go reach out to an adjacent surveyor that might have done something in the area, or is there
Yeah.
any resources to find out who's done something nearby?
It's really hard. It's either you find the caps and you try to get a hold of the surveyor that did it if they're still around. In my area, a lot of the surveyors that we come across aren't with us anymore. So it's finding those records that have, I've just recently joined the Surveyor Society here in Jersey, and hearing some of the stories from the old guys that some of these old timers that passed away, and the family didn't know what to do with the records, and the records just got tossed. So
Wow.
it's you know you uh, right now I just leave it up to the boss to have the decision. So
Fair enough. Well, thanks for sharing there.
yeah.
In Utah, most of the counties are indexed up to 1985 or back to 1985. And so it's really easy to jump online, do a quick abstract through their records. It's not always complete or perfect. There's certainly times where it's better to go to the courthouse. Right here in the via official records, Wattles talks about the grantor grantee index. Going through those old, index cards and just tracing it backwards till you find a common grantor or the original parcel there. Doing that, often they'll have some of those indexed at the courthouse that you're not going through the cards, but you can't necessarily pull the deeds online. But I've seen the case where that deed isn't online, but there might be some sort of tax description. And more of those are getting to be about the same one for one, right? They're copying it from the actual deed onto the GIS map or the tax map or what it might be. But I've seen quite a few surveyors that instead of going down to the courthouse, they just say they'll take this tax description and plug it in and start using that as their description, assuming it's correct. And there's certainly risks in that, and that's harder to defend than the actual document there in your hands. But that's just another one of those extrinsic sources that could help you figure something out, but shouldn't be used, in my opinion, as that final end all be all to make determinations. We've got quite a bit going on in the chat here, so I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. So we kind of mentioned this, but Lori's saying that she works with the title companies, having a great relationship with them. I've gotten into the habit now on any of our big developments that I know there's going to be title work. There's may or may not be an ALTA survey on it. I've gotten the habit of just I'll make my determination, and then I sit down with the title company, and we actually go through the boundaries, see if they have any issues that they would red flag in a title policy, and that's become a very successful way of pulling documents that I haven't been able to find, or think of things that I haven't noticed. As a surveyor, it's really easy for me to call a deed to a fence or an occupation line, or a number of different things because of what's written on the deed, but they'll get flagged by the title company because they they go more strictly to what the four corners of the document says, right? And so a record, a survey where I apply that to the ground is far different than what a purchase might be or a title insurance might insure. And so we found great success in having that dialogue and having come down to the office and walking through the boundary together as kind of a final step before we finalize things. And that's been really great. So we talked about Joe's, and Jen said most of our deeds are online in Massachusetts, if I remember correctly. It's that MA. I think it's where she said she was from in previous classes. But sometimes you have to still use the scanned indexes to find the book and page, and some registries charge you to download. So we've got one county here that is a flat fee and you get everything. And they're actually going to open up more of their records in the next couple of years. And then I've got another county that charges you for every little mouse click and then charges you quadruple when you actually open a document. And it's tough. But we charge those back to the client for the documents, and then we just use that as a matter of business. We know that's a monthly business expense, on the monthly charges. We just know it's coming, however much or little we use that. But she also says most plans are indexed and searchable. Massachusetts. Thanks, Jen, for confirming that. So there's some other resources there. Anyone else want to share how they do that or how they gather those or search for other records to help them determine what their deed is?
Well, I'm from Kern County. We have over 8,000 square miles, and I'm from an oil county. And our quasi maps are only for early county surveys. We put in miscellaneous maps, and you'll find unrecorded oil field surveyors. Every oil field, Standard Oil Company, Associated Oil, General Petroleum, Richfield, they had their own surveyors. And be them licensed or not, but their maps, they're out there in the field setting lease corners, and that you will find. So, it's a good idea to go and look in the miscellaneous maps that we have. There's a lot of stuff at our county surveyor's office that has never made it to online. So when I hear, it's all online, I kind of chuckle to myself because it's not. There's stuff in the, in these back rooms where they store these maps that people don't know about. We have one map called CARM maps, County Assessor Recorded Maps, and they sold land off of those. And if you don't know what a CARM map is, well, where do I get it? You can go to the assessors, but usually they're at the county surveyors in a book in the back room that you have to ask for, and if you don't know about it, you're out. We have, take maps, Army Corps of Engineer maps in our county surveyor's office. They're not online. We do have, records of surveys, filed maps. Filed maps are maps that are prepared by the county or by the state of California, and the only file is in the county surveyor's office. They're not recorded. They're just on file of what they've done. There's a lot of information on it. So I think in California, in the 58 counties we have, it's going to be different from county to county, is what you asked for. I worked for our county surveyor's office for 5 years, and I went through every drawer I could get my hands on, just being nosy to see what we had. We got cemetery maps of all. You got to know to ask, hey, do you have any cemetery maps, and which one you need if you're around the boundary of it. And something, I'm working on a project right now is I'm getting ready to order a chain of titles because there is a problem. And I got to deal with the title company. I was a deputy county recorder for 5 years, and I could go down and do it, but it takes so much time to do a title search and to do a chain of title. And it's just easier to, and their title companies run about $1,000 for a chain of title, and how do you tell your client, well, I need another 1,000, figure out what's really going on here. So, you got the assessor's office, you got the recorder's office. Another one we have is clerk of the board. Sometimes they have plats drawn, They were just 8.5 by 11s, and they're on file at the clerk of our board, which is the supervisors. They approve projects, and there'll be a map in there. Found evidence to section corners in these little plats, so they're a place to go look for them at. There's all kinds of resources. We have canals, Bureau of Land Management. We have two large canals I know of. The information was at the Bureau of Land Management, and I ended up getting the maps from them, and they sure solved a lot of headaches that I had. But I had to go through there, and dealing with Washington D.C., dealing with Sacramento, and ended up back in my own hometown where the maps are supposed to be on file, and that's where we found them. I had to get BLM to do the work, but projects can take months when you only got weeks to do it, and you got to say, hey, tell the client we have a big problem. We just got to, we're waiting on people, and that's what seems to be. But any thought, I mean, just go to canal companies, go to Forest Service. Forest Service has surveyors in California. You can contact them. They'll give you their notes, if they're so you find them everywhere. And if you haven't dug enough, dig more.
Yeah.
Tim,
Plenty of places to keep digging.
How about the railroads, Tim? Have you had any luck with the railroads? I haven't had any luck with working with them.
Okay, we have in File and Kern County, they have some railroad maps on file. But when you got to deal with the railroad, you got to go through names. There's valuation maps that the railroad has. And getting the valuation maps, and only the large railroads are going to give it to you, like Union Pacific or BNSF, in Burlington Northern and Santa Fe. And they get, like I think the last time I did was $120 for 5 maps. They'll give you a paper copy. They'll give you a electronic copy, and but you got to tell them the milepost that you need. You're not supposed to go on railroad right away.
Right.
Yes, the FRA, which is a Federal Railroad Association, they have five inspectors. I've gone to railroad classes, and they can get you for trespassing. And the fine, when I talked to them, they said it was $27,000 is the maximum fine. But you think, and I said, well, is it the company? And they said, no, it's you individually. So each person on the survey party could be nailed. And if you ever try to do a proper survey on the railroad, it gets expensive. We tried doing one. They wanted $2 million insurance in case we derailed a Amtrak train. But all in all, we had to have like $8 million insurance. And thank God we had reflectorless total stations, and we're able to shoot the rail from the side for working on accidents. But some maps are like your smaller railroad companies. No, you're not going to get any maps from them. You're just kind of out of luck. You got to know, like being in California, Southern Pacific uses a taper curve, and Santa Fe uses a spiral. And you got to have the books for them to figure out what they're doing.
I only knew enough to stay away from them.
Well, I always did enough to always go towards them because I found them interesting. And now, you say, well, just split the rails. I don't know if any of you guys have seen these new rail equipments. They have a thing called rail aligners. They can go up, they can jack that rail 6 inches left or right, and you start moving it. And then in these courses that I took, they said that they could, they'll have to go out every so often and add a piece of rail so they can fit, or cut a piece of rail out so they can get these things to tie and have smooth curves. But, construction of railroads have come a long ways. And, sometimes you can't trust the center line of the rail. If it's a long straight right away, you're okay. But you get into the curves, you will have problems.
Well, last railroad that I that I dealt with was oh gosh, somewhere up in the desert near Palm Springs, and we had a title company on this project, and we were locating a flood control channel that was paralleling the railroad, and railroad obviously had senior rights, and we were trying to get to the bottom of how that railroad right of way was actually granted, how it came into place, so that we know how to place the flood control channel next to it. And the title company basically dug out a congressional order from probably 1860s, maybe 1870s, something right at the time of the California statehood, basically issued an order that the railroad right-of-way is 200 feet from wherever the rail is located, center of the rails, no matter where they're located at any point in time on that particular spur. So the way it read is basically you didn't look for the original location of the rails. Wherever the rails were at the current time, that's 200 feet on either side. That's your right of way, which kind of the other side of our right of way was fixed by public lands, a patent or something. So it turned out the flood control right of way ended up having some variability in it because of the seniority of the railroad and how the three kind of puzzled together. So sometimes the right of way apparently moves with the railroad.
Well, and in Utah, we've in the last 20 years created what we call front runner. So that's a rail car from our state transit department that runs north and south out of Salt Lake. And when they originally did that, heading north, which was the first leg, a lot of that was on a railroad rail, right? They bought or rented the space to then run track. And then in other areas where the railroad right of way was wide enough, they actually installed their own track in between and moved often the other track. And so now it has shifted so that, fortunate for us, they went through and did a fairly complete survey to establish where the right of way is, and you can follow in the footsteps. But it's hard because there are reasons and occasions, like it's been noted, that railroads can move, even just the form of construction that we have now, but the needs of the current right of way. Kind of continuing on the conversation, thinking about, we're talking about records of survey and these public records, but Wattles does note here at the end of 2.3 of this page here that there are special types of maps, and they're different in every state, and we've kind of talked about some of them, but that actually then change title, right, or change the deed. And so he says there's a special type of map used in many areas under different names, such as licensed surveyor's map, land surveyor's map, record of survey map, which by whatever name adopted is in effect a public record of a private survey. This private survey as such generally does not change or create lines of title. There are, however, 4 exceptions that he gives to that. So he says, if this type of map is requested by the court to be prepared and filed in a decree of partition, and the court tells the surveyor how to divide the land. 2, if a part of an agreement line surveyed and shown on the map is then cross-referenced into and with whatever official record is recorded in on the agreement in the agreement line between the adjoining owners. 3, when it is used as a correction map showing errors and or omissions on a previously filed map, the legal acceptance of this process should be verified before using it. And finally, sometimes, if permitted by law, when it is used in lieu of a subdivision map. And in Utah, our laws on boundary line agreements and boundary line adjustments have recently changed. And so when there's a boundary line agreement, granted, the theory in a boundary line agreement is that the line location is unknown, and so now we're agreeing upon where it is, and in theory that line may not actually be moving or is not actually moving. The line's always been the line, now we agree to where it is. But when we do a boundary line agreement, there's a description of the agreed upon line that gets recorded at the recorder's office and becomes part of the public record. Constructive notice is given in that case, right, that this is the new or the current or the agreed upon line. But part of the requirement is that a survey is filed prior to the recording of the agreement. And again, in Utah, a survey does not have any effect on real land. It is just the surveyor's opinion and reproduction of the deed on the ground. But they are now tied together because that agreement references, here's the boundary line agreement as noted in record of survey 5712 at the surveyor's office, right? So then you can go back to the survey and reference it. So there are cases where there are surveys or maps that would not normally affect the boundary location more than just a reference to it, but there are, as he says here, instances where those would be used in reference to then support the deed and support the survey. He continues on to talk about extrinsic sources. I think we've talked quite a bit about that. But these odd deeds that we see. So he says right here, via extrinsic sources. I'll highlight it. In a very different vein, you may find descriptions with which you must deal, having not only no caption, but no ties to record information and or sense in the matter of wording used supposedly describe the subject property. The following was a deed recorded in 1947. Part of Lot 3, Block 14, Electric Railway HM STD Association, I'm guessing 1427. There's that diagonal that Jerry shared, right? 14 diagonal 27, MR 1011 and a half S, Harvard Boulevard, South Harvard Boulevard would be, my assumption, being 25 feet on a line running north 8 degrees S, north 8 degrees, plural, north 8 degrees south, on cement sidewalk 140 feet north from incinerator to line of the west side, LT thence 145, west side left, then 145 feet east on the wooden fence line of starting. So what do those mean? What other sources? Going through other deeds of the area, jargon of the time, may help you kind of interpret that. And so I think that's what he's getting at in this chapter is when we come up with deeds, when we're trying to recreate deeds, there's a lot in there that is just confusing. It made sense to them at the time, but is lost on us. And so going outside of that document is critical. To understand what was intended in that. An example here in 2.6, an example of a road deed of earlier vintage reads a strip of land 60 feet in width commencing at the north end of where the new bridge across the Santa Ana River at Yorba is to be built, location having been made by the Board of Supervisors and the contract having been let for same. Said bridge being located at the center of the south end of said strip extending 60 feet in width in a northeasterly direction until it intersects the old road at the corner of the cypress hedge at the present home of the grantor. So you've got to go back to that time to try and understand where all those things were because they may have changed today. So he gives us a little assignment, if this were a real class, to go find a deed a parcel that you're unfamiliar with and go research it and go back in time. So that is chapter 2 of Wattles. Any questions, other comments, or discussion of chapter 2?
Yay, we made it through chapter 2.
Yep. Jen threw one here in the chat. She says, my favorite deed goes something like this. Beginning at a point on the road, thence westerly by the northern boundary, then southerly by the western boundary and the town line, then easterly by the southern boundary, thence northerly by the eastern boundary and the road. There are 3 different versions of the town line in that area. I like it. I've done a few deeds where it's thence along the town line, and I didn't know when the deed was written, and I didn't know which town line they were talking about. So that's always a tough one. Okay, well, we still got a little bit of time. You guys want to jump into chapter? Oh, go ahead, Connie.
Oh, I just want to give everybody an earworm of that song, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Because this chapter reminds me of it.
Yep. Okay, now we get into the real fun stuff. I mean, the whole purpose of the book, right? How do we now write descriptions? Jumping into chapter 3. So description fundamentals. Quick introduction. He talks about the types of descriptions, the parts of the descriptions. He gives us some very bad examples, words and phrases, a dictionary, and then relationships between descriptions and surveys. So let's talk about the types of descriptions, I guess, just right here in the introduction. So there are generally 5 types of descriptions. Type 1A, a series of lines around the perimeter of an area known as a meets and bounds description. Meets meaning bearings and distances, and bounds meaning the monuments, both physical, legal, or even any other bounds. He talks later on about calls to an owner, right? And we'll talk about that here in a second. Bounding by, Granny Annie there on the west side. What did she own back then? Number B, letter B here, number B. A boundary description stated totally by reference to other parcels already on record in the public repository. It merely ties by reference to the deeds of the owners adjoining each boundary line of the property being described. I experienced this when we were doing some work in Ohio. It was completely bound by ancient owners that do not currently own it. Grandma Annie on the one side and Uncle Buck on the south side, and that's by, Cousin Joe on the east side, and then the road on the north. And it's, when you open that up and are unfamiliar with the area, that was quite the challenge to, well, who were all these people and what did they have what did they own? Hey, thanks, Lori, for jumping on. So C, all or part of a section in public land area, aliquot part description. Us in the West deal with that quite often. D, a lot in a subdivision as shown on a map. And E, strip descriptions for right-of-ways, pipelines, roads, etc., which may cross many parcels. Any other description types you guys can think of or experienced? Any other qualifying calls to any of those?
No, I don't have anything to add other than the bounds descriptions are the simplest thing for a non-surveyor to create and the hardest one for us to figure out where they're at on the ground.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay, so then getting into English class, and granted, I became a surveyor because I hated English class. So, and now as a manager, I'm writing proposals and descriptions and reports, and my English has to be triple checked by everyone in the office because it is not my strong suit. But just getting back to the old report here, what are the parts of a description? What are the parts of a story or a paragraph? So the main parts of a description are the caption, the body, and sometimes there are qualifiers, such as exceptions or reservations to the deed there. These parts are like a camera. You point the camera in the general direction and it embraces the limited area within which you are dealing, and then you actually get the details of it, the description, further on there. A caption possesses the inherent function of limiting the title to within which it and or detailed description following it may operate. That portion of lot 2, a parcel of land situated in the northwest quarter of section 6, township 7 north, range 3 west, right? We're just generally giving where is this located, and then we start tying it down in a detailed description of what are the bounds of that, now that we can kind of tie it down to a smaller local geography. So here's where I was hoping we'd have plenty of discussion here, but how do you guys write your captions there? The first part. I love to see, because I always get people that don't understand it and they say, well, situate's not a word, but for us surveyors, situate is a word. So how do you guys write that first paragraph? How do you guys caption that?
You have to be careful with the caption. It's not something that you can just gloss over and say that, okay, it's all within the caption, because I've seen plenty of old strip descriptions that would start outside of the caption and run through it. And then you have to be a good reader to pick up, okay, that line's going through your lot and all the way through it, and you got to figure out how is it tied down to your lot. So you can't just gloss over, because like I said, it tells you where, what lot or what parcel of land your legal description is a part of. Gotta be careful there.
Absolutely.
And I've seen strips fall outside of the caption, and title companies go both ways to ensure it with that strip existing, or they will claim that that strip does not exist just as written, even though theoretically tell, whatever is not fixed in a caption shouldn't be part of the description. It's also one of the areas where blunders are commonly made. So the actual decisions on whether certain areas are meant to be granted or not, based on whether they're contained in a caption, can be a crapshoot. So it's kind of a word of caution there.
This is one that always gets me. Let me embarrass myself just a little bit. I'd say 90% of the surveys, 95 even percent of the surveys I do are in one west, one east, or two west, or two east. And I know it, I know what side of the line I'm on, but it is so easy where you've been working in one west and one west and one west, and you start writing another description, but it just happens to be in one east, the same section number, right? And habit, whatever it is, grabs you, and there's my claim to failure right there. Is that always gets me. I have to stop and think, okay, don't just write this and start writing it. You really have to pay attention to what you're doing and not just go on autopilot, because it's easy to make that mistake, especially when you're dealing in similar township range numbers all the time.
So I have a question. What I use situated in that section township range. What do other people use if it's not? Do they use lying within, or I've always used situated. So what's people's preferences around the country?
Utah generally you see Situate, just ending in TE, Situate in.
Situate in, not situated in.
What happened to your English, Trent?
Hey, like I said, caveat here, I'm not an English guy. I just do what everyone else does here. If they're all jumping off cliffs and I'm following them.
What I like to see written in legals is after your caption, and at the end of it, I always put also being in section, township, and range. So you know where you're at that way. So you don't have to, go look up, the track number or the lot number or the, where this thing's, lying out at, gives you an idea of what section you're in. Being it in a closing section, that's where a lot of people get off the track. They'll say like the west half of section 6. Okay, section 6 really didn't have a west half if you really look at it that way. You have lots.
Dang. I feel you.
And the lots, lawyers like to say, well, the west half and east half. I've dealt with lawyers that way, and I said, no, put out, government lot 4, 5, 6, and 7, spell them out, and then you can give out the acreage next to it, or you can call out, the east half. And it's frustrating when you start doing it, because you're going, okay, now when they say the west half of 6, do I go back and measure all of 6 and then split that in half? Because that's it's the way that they've got it written, and it gets frustrating trying to figure out what they're doing. And we got to go out and find lines of occupation and deal with it that way.
Sometimes you'll write it and it goes through a couple of different agencies, map checkers, and everybody wants it done differently. So sometimes you get several permutations of it. But just for greens, we have attempted to standardize how we want it written in the office, and I will just read this preamble to you. It says that certain parcel of land situated in the city of Los Alamitos, County of Orange, State of California, being a portion of parcel 55 as described in a quitclaim deed to California, to Southern California Edison Company, recorded blah 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 in book and page of official records in the office of the county recorder of Los Angeles County, comma, described as follows. And then you start with the meat of the description. I used to, for the longest time, write the descriptions with 2 paragraphs in a preamble or in a caption where one states the state, county, and the city, and in that order too, because you're supposed to go from the biggest to smallest. And then I state the document or a parcel or a portion of the section that where I'm narrowing it down to what map to look at, and then start with the actual description itself. But some people like to combine it in a same sentence.
And that's what I combine all in the same sentence, but I start with the legal or the survey jargon first. So a parcel of land situated in the northwest quarter of township range of the Salt Lake Basin Meridian, comma, said parcel also located in city, county, state, period, being more particularly described as follows. And then I get into that detailed description. Teresa threw in here, I got a question for Teresa here real fast. So she wrote in here, all that portion of lot 15 of El Rancho Park, Kings County, tract number 117, according to the map thereof. So is that the caption of it? Or to me, that is the actual legal description, because there is no, if it's all of a lot, all of a map, there should then be no qualifying or describing portion.
This is for a right-of-way acquisition, so it's all that portion within that lot 15.
Okay.
So this is the caption only, and then it's more particularly described as follows as what we're taking for the right-of-way acquisition.
So would you write all that portion, a strip of land 15 feet in width, located in that portion, or the following described portion of lot 15? When I do a strip description or a center line description, that's generally what I'll do is a strip of land 30 feet wide, centered on the following described center line, being a part of, or
Yeah, that's how I do it. I'll start with the strip, so many feet wide, being a part of your lot and track, and on and on, yep.
And then you get into that detailed description on the bottom. Jen threw it here. Here it's situated on the side of road in the town of, in the county. So situated, and it's limited by meaning and intending to convey all that land belonging to in book and page. So I do have a question here for the group. Often we'll write a description for a portion of a legal parcel, right? We're going to do phase 1 of a subdivision, or we're going to take out this portion of it. And I always wonder this, because we still write it the same. General practice is a parcel of land situate in. But if we're not actually describing the full parcel, it's not yet a legal parcel. Any thoughts on calling it a parcel of land when you're not actually describing a true parcel yet? Does that question make sense?
So it would be a future parcel, right?
So what is it? What is it currently?
So currently, it'd be a big property. We're cutting off a corner of it for phase 1. It hasn't been sold off. It hasn't been split off, but we're writing it for any number of reasons, right? So it's not technically a parcel. It is a portion of a parcel, and maybe that in itself, I'm answering my own questions, right?
Right.
A portion of a parcel.
What was it called before that?
Yeah.
What would the tile company call it? Is it a portion of lot of something of a section, or
meets and bounds parcels, generally
Right.
what it is. So a portion of this parcel. And
yes?
Yeah, no, we don't refer to future parcels in the legal description or future anything. It kind of can produce a cloud on a title eventually. And the intent of once you say future, let's say future parcel 3 of parcel map, blah, 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 if that parcel map doesn't record or if it changes, then all of a sudden your entire intent changes. So you have to basically go with the original description that deeded the entire piece of land. Hopefully it's something easy, like a parcel of a previous parcel map, and then you just slice the meets and bounds a portion that is equal to that future parcel with no references to the future parcel.
So Jen threw out here too, I think, trying to answer my question. That description wouldn't be in a deed until it's conveyed. You sometimes have a subdivision plan, or we call it a plat here, that's recorded without any conveyance. The landowner is the one being the subdivider, and they just subdivide it and leave a remainder, and that's a common practice here as well. But being the original survey on a plat, I would call that a parcel because it becomes a parcel on that plat. And kind of ignores the overall, at least by common practice, I believe here, at least in my mind. In my mind, it does.
Wait, I think I'm not fully understanding. So when you record a subdivision, when you prepare a plat, does it get recorded?
Yes.
And then does that impart a constructive notice that those lots have been created?
Yep.
Yeah, so at that point, you can start using them in a legal description because the lots already exist, even though they're not necessarily in somebody's chain of title yet. They haven't been conveyed. They exist legally as an independent lot. At least that's how that's handled in our state, in California. So then you can use them in a description.
Yeah, are you talking about like the lot 4 of that subdivision or the overall boundary? I'm talking about the overall boundary of that subdivision because that'll be described on the face of the plat, and then you leave this remainder of the original parcel. Right, you may not subdivide out the plat, and then you might not split off the plat portion into its own parcel and then file a plat on top of that. You just cut out a portion of the overall with the plat itself. The county creates a remainder parcel that would be future phases or something like that. And so on that, I would write a description for a number of things, like even covenant and restriction documents, CC&R documents. A parcel of land. I always thought, well, it's not really a parcel yet. A portion of the overall, and that's kind of where I was kind of getting to before when I was rambling. A portion of this parcel, which will then become a subdivision, but there's what the CC&Rs cover, or an HOA document, or a zoning description, right? We write all sorts of descriptions before that's even made. And I just left it by habit, a parcel of land, but I always had that question in the back of my head. Is it really a parcel if it's not a parcel yet?
But in our state, when you do that, you end up with this thing called a parcel of land that was labeled as a designated remainder on a recorded map. So you can, since it's on the official public record on a recorded map, you could, if you properly reference this, you can say that certain parcel of land shown as title designated remainder on it's shown on a map of tract blah 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 blah, and then describe that particular tract map, because as long as there is just one designated remainder on that particular tract map, you have a unique identifier to that parcel. You're not introducing any kind of the ambiguity. I've seen maps sometimes where the remainders are non-contiguous, and that introduced a problem. So you have to kind of watch out for pitfalls like that.
Yep. Okay, great discussion. I appreciate you kind of walking that through with me, guys. So then we get into the actual kind of the bread and butter of the description. The important part is the actual description. What are we describing here? And so he goes on to say this is top of 3.3, the preferred method of writing descriptions is using the best type or combination of types and parts that will give the clearest and shortest descriptions possible. In some cases, the entire description can be included within the caption. Kind of like we saw, Teresa had that one, all of that portion of lot 15. She was talking about a strip that might go through it, but it's really easy to say your caption, your description in that case are all the same. All of a lot in a subdivision, all of a tract in a, whatever it might be, because that is a known quantity, right? That it's been established and recorded and filed and mapped properly, whatever it might be. And it's really easy just to reference a single parcel in that case. So in some cases, the entire description can be included within the caption. Your slogan should be concise clarity without ambiguity. However, it is advisable to be certain of sufficient detail and words so you do not have any possibility of misunderstanding. It is far better to add a few words than to be short of the meaning. A few examples will help to illustrate this. And so he's got, I love this one, beginning at a hole in the pond, then easterly 3 hatchet lengths, then southerly 6 hatchet lengths, etc. Excuse me. So, he gives the answer to this, but you guys open up a document and see this description. What are you thinking? A hole in a pond. This must be in Wisconsin or Minnesota somewhere. It's got to be. He says the hole is where the lake or the pond was so thick that it wouldn't freeze over, and the hatchet length was the distance a woodman's axe could normally be thrown. Another deed covering a transaction of land in part of the old Mexican territory read, beginning at the northwest quarter of Pablo's Corral, thence northwesterly 3 smokes to an old willow tree, then southwesterly 5 smokes to the Zanza, etc. How far is a smoke? Exhaustive inquiries of old-timers unfolded the story of a caballero on horseback who smoked cigarettos at a leisurely pace en route, and he consumed 3 of them during his ride from the corral to the tree, and so on and so forth. So to do a proper survey, do I need to take up smoking? I've never smoked, and I've never really ridden a horse, but if I was supposed to truly follow in the footsteps, do I need to go buy a lighter and a pack and go chase that one down?
Well, first of all, the tobacco from back then and tobacco today are 2 different things. Tobacco is made to burn faster today. That's so they can smoke more cigarettes. Back then, it was just straight tobacco, and they would roll it. These descriptions that like this are in, you'll find them in ranchos here in California. They'll talk about it, about smoking and how many, and on the top of the horse, or if they're walking, and this is the legal descriptions. They start out, then the government has to put those on the ground, and that's where they'll put the, here in California, the deputy surveyors would do it, and they'd have to figure it out. And then once they monumented the rancho, that's it, baby. That they get their land. You get to butt up against it. That's all.
Yep. So I wrote here in my book, because I was reading through this the other week, we have to be cognizant of the future. And I think in the West, and I've noticed this from our discussions, that we may get a little lazy in our descriptions, and we may do just a very simple meets description, right? Especially in our sectionalized land, beginning at a point and mathematically around it. And I see a lot of people, and I've made the same mistake, I guess I'll say, in just doing this very simple mathematical, hey, it's recreatable, our equipment's really great right now, it's going to be easy for someone to retrace what we did. We think there's very little confusion. And who knows what we're doing 10, 15, 20, 100 years from now when they go over these descriptions that we're writing. So I wrote here in the side of my book here is, we need to write these descriptions so that they're future proof. An example of that is this next one. He talks about beginning at the north end of an old adobe wall, now moved. And so there's this balance of putting these bounds calls in there, thence along, a barbed wire fence to this, and we try and give this intent, and over time that intent gets lost. It gets hard to interpret or figure out. And so there's this balance of clear meets calls and bounds calls that prove what the meets bounds are doing. The following appeared in a deed recorded in Hartford, Connecticut in 1812, 147 acres, 3 roods, and 19 rods, after deducting whatever swamp, water, rock, and road areas there may be included therein, and all other lands of little or no value, the same being part of said deceased 1,280 acre colony grant, and the portion hereby set off being known as near to and on the other side of Black Oak Ridge, bounded and described more particular as follows, and then they describe it. That made sense back then. Everyone knew what that was, especially back in the East. We learn about in these books, and how they used to walk it and do these bounds parties, right? And would understand it, but today it just doesn't work. Description from a will in the county of Prince William in Virginia reads, beginning at a pine, then south 23.5 west, 87.2 poles to a bunch of dogwood sprouts by 3 red oak sprouts, then south 45.5 west, 89 poles to a small hickory and several marked pointers. He says these have references to various points or things obviously difficult to recover. This indefiniteness is not confined, however, to the East Coast. Is not defined to the east nor the area of the 13 colonies. Witness the following description as parts of the ranchos out west. Beginning at a post in an irregular mound of earth and bones of slaughtered cattle at a place called Corral of the Mission, about 4 chains north of the point of a Cienega. And
yeah.
What's that?
Cienega.
I should know. I speak a little bit of Spanish, but I'm rusty. So.
Well, that's what happened to your English then.
Yeah. I got to keep with the English till I take up another language. Beginning at a post in a mound of sand at the high water mark of the Pacific Ocean, nearly opposite the center of an island 1 mile long. Where are they, and how do you orient these points? So we have a lot of different ways to call out deeds. I see surveyors get so descriptive, even in calling adjacent documents. Thence to the west line of a warranty deed, to that certain warranty deed recorded in the county surveyor's office, entry number, book and page, date, the names of the signers, right? So there is no question which warranty deed you're referring to. Or some just say, hey, to that warranty deed, entry number, whatever, and there's, I guess the question is what is right, and part of that is our areas that we work in. I see the chat moving here. So Jen asked, do you mean the remainder after you subdivide out a parcel? In the deed here, it's most likely to be the same description it had before, excluding the subdivided parcel. It may also reference the plan of the subdivision parcel, whether the whole remainder lot is shown or not. It should have a designation on the plan. So getting back to that, just a few minutes ago. So in Utah, if we just left it as a remainder parcel and it wasn't part of the plat, the county recorder would, in their tax description, add the caveat, the overall less than accepting that portion, that subdivision or that portion sold out, and referencing the documents that ported out. There's a lot of different ways of doing it, but if you were to just do a simple title search and not do your job properly as a surveyor, you might just pull that parent deed and not notice that there's a subdivision been cut out of it. Aubrey threw a question out here. Question for the group. It seems that meets and bounds descriptions are the go-to when written legal instead of a description that is simpler. Why is that? It seems that meets and bounds descriptions are the go-to when written legal instead of a description that is simpler. Why is that? I'm not quite sure I understand what the question is. Do you want to unmute yourself and throw the question out?
Yeah. So Trent, what I was getting at is, so I review. So I'm working in the right-of-way department for the county Riverside, and I see a lot of descriptions written for right-of-way acquisitions that are they could be done with a simple, the westerly 30 feet of this lot, right? But instead, the go-to seems to be, we're just going to write a meets and bounds description around it. And I was just trying to figure out why as surveyors, we tend to go with a meets and bounds description over something more simplified and, less, could be less ambiguous in the future.
It usually boils down to somebody's personal preference and what they're comfortable with. Sometimes that requirement could come from an agency. For example, and I am guessing which agencies, you could potentially have Caltrans tell you, oh, our policy is that for certain descriptions, we need to have meets and bounds instead of just westerly 30 feet of a certain lot would be basically a bounds only description. But sometimes these descriptions are being handled by lay people, and the request comes in saying, oh, can you still do meets and bounds because I want to be able to follow this description with a finger on a map. Usually when an experienced surveyor has their druthers, we usually say, no, that's not the purpose of the legal description. The purpose of the legal description is to be legally recognizable parcel and westerly 30 feet of a certain lot to do a right-of-way dedication is sufficient. But like I said, it's going to depend on somebody's personal preferences. Usually whoever is in charge of the project and has created certain standards. I kind of have a little bit of the same pet peeve. I see people writing very lengthy, wordy legal descriptions that go round and round and around almost an entire strip when a centerline description is sufficient. And
that's fine for a strip like that. But when you're talking about the westerly so many feet of a parcel, you're making more work for yourself because now you've got to go to find that parcel first and then take out those feet. So I would always write a legal description with meets and bounds going around a parcel of land like that. I would never write doing a portion of.
You wouldn't write just westerly 30 feet of a certain parcel? How?
No, I would describe the parcel first and then cut
you
out
would
that.
Well, I mean, usually I'm talking about the easily identifiable parcels.
Sure.
Let's say it's a lot in a tract. Okay. I will say, and maybe it's an older tract, you're widening a street. I will say westerly 30 feet of this particular lot and the westerly 30 feet of another lot. I'm not going to go describing. If it's a very irregular parcel, something that was originally described by a deed and not necessarily mapped, and it needs to be researched and almost a whole new boundary establishment, I will put a different level of effort because it's not going to be as easily identifiable. But yeah, so it's a lot of it boils down to people's preferences.
It's got to be identifiable without ambiguity. We do not want this parcel put in the wrong place. So you can keep it simple, but sometimes being too simple is just creating more ambiguity.
So there you have it, Aubrey. You have your answers. Different people will have different opinions over how to skin that particular question.
And I've always said you can put 10 surveyors in a room to write the same legal description and you'll get 10 different ways.
Different ones.
Yeah.
Which is correct.
So, and just to throw some other thoughts in here is, it depends on what the take is or the purpose is. When I did utility surveys, we weren't breaking down the individual parcels in any sort of survey, right? We were punching in deeds as they were, and if there were gaps or overlaps, we essentially ignored them, and the utility company would pay twice for any gaps or overlaps, and we would write the take. But I know a lot of the DOTs they want a more firm survey of what that original parcel is. And so Joe threw out here, this 4.15 example. I haven't read through it enough, but I think I know what the intent is if you don't do a proper survey of that parcel, right? What is the west 30? Maybe the intent was to widen that road by 30 feet, but that the west 30 of the parcel could be, shifted into what is the current right of way without knowing, right? And so you take 30 and you're actually taking less or more than what you intended to take there because the parcel itself isn't set properly on the ground. So that's always the challenge. We see a lot of that when we talk about aliquot part descriptions, where it's the east half of the section and the west half of the section. And so is it, 5280 split even, or is it the half of the whatever actual measurements are, or is it, the west half was sold first, so they actually have the full rights and the east half loses. There's a lot of discussion there to be had on how you interpret that. I'm always in favor of trying to do a center line description. I like those a lot because they're clear. And there's really not a lot of bounds you put into a center line description because it is just a path and a route. And so it's fairly obvious what you're trying to convey there. Great question though. Jen says it's why Massachusetts does a taking when it acquires conservation land, quiets any boundary issues. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons and arguments back and forth of how and what to write. So we're right at 6:25 now, my time. let's say 25 past the hour here, so everyone's equal. We're kind of hit an end of a kind of a portion of the chapter, right? We get into words and phrases, and I think that can be left for another day. So key takeaways for me here is being aware of how and what you write. The intent of it being is not just for today, but for the future. For 100 years from now, when someone's got to read what we did and interpret it, and then they start cursing our names because, hey, we knew those, early to mid 2000s, surveyors, and they were just horrible. They got GPS and they thought they were smarter than everybody, and they just started writing descriptions. And now we've got to solve their issues because we're using, real-time 3D scanner VR surveys, and we can survey better than them. And man, they just really screwed things up in 2023. And I wish they would have written better descriptions, right? So there's quite a bit to learn from this book here of what our intent is, what we're writing, and it's not just for today. So that is my 2 cents. Any other thoughts, comments, anything to add, guys?
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Stupid. Keep it simple, stupid. I'll throw that out there, the KISS method, right?
That's correct.
Okay, well.
Roy Minnick used to say, you're not getting paid by the word with legal descriptions. So you don't want to use too little, but you don't want to use too many either, and accidentally introduce ambiguities too.
Yeah.
So it gets tricky. You need to sit down and really pay attention to what your parcel looks like and what the intent is and how you want to say it, and look for unintended consequences of what you said.
Yeah. That just reminded me, I was going to add in here, I had a note in my book too. I closed my book as we were discussing it, but he talked about those qualifiers at the back end of a description. You've got your caption, your description, and then some qualifiers, less than accepting, being a portion of. And often I will write on those type of takes, those unique takes, the west 30 feet type takes, right? The intent of this description is to do this. I actually will write that sometime, like, this is the purpose of it. I am writing a description currently. Actually, let's do this real fast. Let me stop my share here. I've got a parcel that was created because of a short section and really bad surveys.
I actually had to look that up not too long ago to do a tiebreaker in the office. Somebody wanted to add a paragraph clarifying the intent in their legal description, and that's not actually not a common practice, in at least in the area where I practice. So a lot of people were all up in arms about how that doesn't belong in a legal description. And lo and behold, as you read some of the books, you can add clarifying clauses to the intent at the end of your legal description.
Yep. So this is a parcel here that's been shifted. So you can see this blue rectangle here, and you can see this underlying blue rectangle here on the recorder's map, this really skinny strip. And you can see this gap in between it. This just had a bad description, and then it was further exacerbated by other bad descriptions where they west half of this or the west 30 feet of this, and this deed got split in between this parcel here and that underlying parcel there. Split them in the county recorder, because all they do is go off of the record documents. They did this. Well, we need to get this strip off and underneath these overall parcels so they can be developed. But a survey of it, a true survey, reveals that there is no gaps and overlaps and issues here. And so I did my best to write a meets description of this little strip here, and then underneath it I wrote every qualifying clause I could. The intent of this description is to describe that leftover parcel that was split at this time because of this reason, being all of that parcel ID 12040 0111. I mean, my description, my qualifying clauses at the end of my description were far longer than what the meets and bounds of this little, like 8-foot strip was. I just sat there, everything I could do to make it very clear that the intent was to describe this piece that was accidentally split from the original and created an overlap here and a gap here and split by this rogue piece. So that's one case I'm working on right now. We're trying to get through, working with attorneys in the county recorder's office to accept it, because it doesn't actually exist, but someone thinks it does. So there's a great example of those qualifying clauses at the end of the description. Jen threw out there, if you include in intent, is that binding in any way? Absolutely. If it's on a description, if you're describing it, it's a legal description, and Wattles talks about these descriptions being legal because they need to be legally defendable. However you write that and whatever you write. So any of that that's in there, the hardest challenge is you will get title companies that truncate descriptions, take just the description itself, take off the caption at the beginning and the qualifying clauses at the end. And that's just a challenge that we have to deal with as we work and educate title companies. I see that all the time on deeds. Things get truncated off. Or landowners will truncate it off when they sell it and do their own deeds because they don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, out here we have a business practices to always have a sketch accompanying legal description, which is a part of your clarifying any information really, and it's not uncommon for those sketches to disappear prior to the document recording. So
I know that in our lot line adjustments and that we do in California in Kern County is we'll draw a map. They want a prior map and as existing and as proposed, and the map will record with the first with a set of documents. And then when you go to pull up the legal description, you never get the map. The map kind of just goes away. They don't give it to you. You have to go back and, from the title company, I always go to them and say, hey, this is what I need. I need the complete document, and they'll pull it for me. But yeah, and they do it on parcel map waivers. several documents get done that way. And when it first records, there's the map you have, and they put on it illustrated purposes only in our county. And I don't know if it's in the other counties, but then people try to hold that's gospel. No, it's an illustrated purpose. It's showing intent, but you don't, don't go by it. You can't hold me liable for it. So.
Yeah. Well, that's a whole another chapter, is sketches to company legal description.
Yeah. And we've tried to get them stamped legal descriptions. Title companies want the Word document so they can put it into their documents easier versus like a stamp scan or PDF that that they can't then adjust, and they won't take those always. Some great discussions I think we'll have in future sessions. Jen just clarified her question here. The meaning intending to convey, I was thinking of sometimes a parcel is conveyed for some purpose, but the purpose isn't necessarily binding. Are you meaning like, hey, we're selling this off to be, a farm parcel, or, like a use intent versus intent behind how to split it? Is that what you're trying to get at?
I mean, we'll put the language sometimes on a title saying easement for, I don't know, telephone company name for whatever, conduits or something like that, which is usually not binding at all, but it still gives you a tiny bit of additional information. So if you find that in some place where it doesn't belong, at least it will raise a red flag for somebody to dig a little bit deeper to make sure that they're looking at the right documentation.
Yeah. So Jen, in my mind, I've seen that being that caption, right? A strip of land 15 feet wide for conservation purposes or for right-of-way purposes. I think that discussion of the question you're asking probably gets more into the legal side of the deed versus the intent of a description of what you're describing. We've got to be careful in that as surveyors, we are describing a piece, right? And that's our intent. Our purpose or our licensure is to describe that and put that on the ground. You do get into a lot of discussions when you review deeds or look at deeds that, last year we looked at one that I was dealing with. It was a right-of-way deed, but was it a right-of-way or was it a transfer of title? And the county approached it at that time as a transfer of title. And so there's probably some other discussions that could be had on a title level or an attorney level of how do you restrict that, like in a conservation sense, right? You're just describing an area to kind of take the Brown and Roby yard. Our purpose is not to determine the why, but just to put the deed on the ground, and that's the attorneys and the judge's job, right? And obviously we get every day far behind that because we have to look at intent, but I think that might be more down to how the document's written and the words inside the document outside of the actual written description.
We can clarify the geometric intent, but if we start talking about types of uses, it could be misconstrued as potential deed restriction or a restriction to the land use, and we really don't have any business because it could become a cloud on title when you start talking about the restrictions to the land use, and we don't have any authority to add restriction to the land unless you're selling your own land and you sell it with a deed restriction on it. So we want to be careful about not introducing something, again, ambiguity.
Yep. But great question. Thank you, Jen, for spurring that conversation. Okay. Well, thank you guys. I love it. I'm loving Wattles. I don't know about you guys, but this is great. It's, again, just like last time, I was learning stuff and changing how I do it. And it's been a little bit since I'd read through this, and I'm already ready to start changing the way I do things and do it better. So I hope you guys are the same way. We will see you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good.
Okay.
exciting.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.